everyone, I'm Dr. Cerf, your iFit guide, and today we're in Central Park, right by the Bethesda fountain. We're going to talk about the brain and the body. Let's go on a walk. So, everyone knows that there's a connection between the brain and the body, but recently we learned a lot more about this connection and how we can use it to improve our health and how our body works. To give you a kind of intro into this idea, many of you probably know about this notion of placebo, that some people take a pill that has nothing in it, just sugar pill, and still get better. So you're sick, they give you a sugar pill, you take it, and a few hours later you feel like you have no headache, or something is better about your digestive system. Now, how does it work? Like, what's going on there? You get no pharmaceutical component from this, and still you get better. And the answer is that your brain does the work. See, to get better, a lot of things in our body need to work in concert. And many times, what needs to happen is that our brain needs to activate things differently and make them work. So for example, you might get this pill that doesn't do anything to your immune system in practice, but it makes your brain activate different systems differently, and suddenly your immune system actually works to solve the problem. And this brings us to a bigger question, which is, what's the relationship between the brain and the body? What can the brain do to the body and vice versa? And well, neuroscientists have been looking at this through a lens of the interaction between the two in a field known as the embodied cognition. Basically, the cognition that your body has and affects your thinking. And I'll give you an example that will make it clear. So here's a study that happened a few years ago, not far from here in New York, that kind of put a lens on this idea. People in this experiment come to the lab. Let's say you're one of them. So you join the lab, they shake your hand, give you a cup of tea, ask you to sit down and write a short essay, say 500 words, describing your relationship with your mother. So people sit there and they kind of write this essay, and then in the end, they turn it on. Someone takes this essay, reads it, and classifies it as positive thoughts about your mom or negative ones. Some people wrote really, really beautiful things about their relationship and how they feel about their mothers and how connected they are. And some people focused on the bad things. I don't like this about her, I don't like that about her. So they classified them into two groups. And when you try to see what determines if your essay falls into the positive group or the negative group, more than anything, the predictive thing was the cup of tea that you received in the beginning. Remember, I told you people came, had their hand shook, and then they got a cup of tea? More than anything, the tea that you got determined what it is. Because half the people got a cup of hot tea and they were asked to hold it in their hand while they write the essay. And some people were given iced tea, a cold cup of tea, and they had to hold it in their hand while they were writing. And what happened is that those who had a hot cup of tea actually felt warm in their body. And this elicited warm thoughts in their mind and ended up leaking into the essay. They wrote warmer and nicer things about their mom because they felt warm in their body. And the other team, the other group that had iced tea felt cold, and it brought the negative ones, the most colder and a little bit less kind of supportive thoughts into their mind. Now, presumably, we all have both in our minds. We have positive thoughts and negative thoughts about everything. And somehow, the state we're in physically affects our mental state and leads us to focus on these thoughts or the others. So this field, embodied cognition, shows us that the state you're in physically, the body, actually changes how you think about the world. And there are many, many studies that show the same effect, that kind of shows the evidence of how strong it is. The weights of things you hold in your hand might change how deep your thoughts are. So people in different studies were asked to write an essay while holding a really heavy book versus just a thin layer of paper, and one group wrote much heavier and more deeper things than the other. And it was replicated with the height of the chair you're in, the temperature in the room you're sitting in, and many, many other ways, all saying the same thing. Our body affects our brain and leads us to think different thoughts about the reality that we're in. And if you take that, we can extrapolate and go further and say that in a way, we can change our mental state if we change our environment. We can decide that we want to give ourselves more angry thoughts that will lead us to be more aggressive when we're about to negotiate, and put the room temperature and put the experience around us such that it will bring different sides of us. In fact, political debates many times start with two teams arguing not really about the content, but just what will be the temperature in the room. Where the debaters are going to stand, will they face each other or not? Will they even stand or sit? All of those things that seemingly are kind of superficial, they're not about the content, turn out to really affect how our brain works. Okay, so if we think about the body and the brain, one thing to understand is that in many ways, the brain is the only thing that nature gave us that keeps adapting after we're born. Our body pretty much is determined once our genetic making is happening. So when you're born, if someone looks at the DNA, they can tell how your eyes color are gonna look, how your hairstyle is gonna be, how tall you're gonna be. Pretty much everything is determined once you're born. Nature gave us one organ in the body, that's our brain, that keeps adapting after we're born and changes with the environment. If the world turns hotter, or if there's some disease around us that requires us to change our behavior, the brain is the part of us that responds to that. That is why humans are among the few animals that are actually born half-baked. If you've ever seen a zebra being born, it's born in 10 a.m. and 10 minutes later it's already rides and walks and kind of behaves normally as if it's been here forever. It's just born and they know how to walk and do it. If you've seen a baby, not the case. They have years until they really become fully mature, months until they start walking, crawling, talking, and interacting. It takes a lot of time for our brain to adapt. And that is because nature gave us a unique brain that keeps evolving and changing and is plastic for years after we're born. The thing about that is that this means that we can mold the brain to experiences and do more with it if we just tailor it to the right direction. Here's what I mean by that. As you're right now walking with me on a treadmill, some of you are getting tired. Maybe some of you feel that it's difficult for you, you want to stop, you can't do it anymore. Maybe you've been exercising before and you're even more tired. Maybe it's just not one of those days. And this is happening in your brain. Something in your brain right now tells another part of your brain, I can't do it anymore. Well, as scientists, we want to understand what this part is. Can we control it? When it says something, is it true? Can we still do things after our brain tells us we cannot do? And what's the relationship between our brain telling us, I want to stop, and our body telling us, I can do more? So if I were to simplify it, generally, the brain has one system that experiences pain and another system that evaluates the pain. So when you're right now walking or running on your treadmill and you're feeling that you can't do it anymore, it means that somewhere parts of your body tell your brain to activate the pain centers, and you just feel pain, and the pain centers tell the other part that it can't do it anymore, and then this other part needs to decide if we stop the walk, stop the run, or continue. Everyone felt it. If you ran, if you exercise ever, at some point you feel you can't do it anymore. Let me start by saying that there are differences between feeling pain and feeling sore, but for the most part when you exercise, if we feel we can't do it anymore, not because we're in pain, but because it's just too tiring, there's a lot more in you than you think. In one study by a colleague of mine, they took athletes and they told them to basically push onto a little device that measures how much power they put into this push with their legs. And those athletes did, a few rounds of like pushing those weights. And at some point they said we couldn't do it anymore, we were too tired. And then what they did, the scientists, is they zapped their brain with a machine called TMS. It's a machine that basically stimulates your brain with a magnetic current. And what it does is it activates your brain and activates the muscles that tell your leg to push. So after the guy said, I can't do it anymore, my legs are tired, I have nothing in me anymore, the scientists stimulated his brain. It was a guy in this particular experiment that I've seen, and they basically told his brain to directly control the legs and make them push. Turns out that the person had about 30% more. So when he thought that he can't do it anymore, he still had a lot more in him that could be used. So why is it the case? Why is it that our brain tells us we can't do it anymore while we actually can? Well, this is a system that nature gave us to protect ourselves. If we always took ourselves to the limit, we're going to injure ourselves potentially, or we're going to do things that are irreversible. So nature gave us a big cushion of kind of gap between when we think we can't do it anymore and when we actually cannot do it anymore. And in this gap lie a lot of exercise and a lot of getting better. Because every time you get to this gap, if you push it a little bit further, you actually make your muscles stronger, and in due time, you change the system such that next time it will be a little bit less painful at the same moment, and it will take a little longer to feel the pain. And this I know from a study that I did myself. So it went the following way. A number of years ago, I was contacted by Red Bull, the drinks company. You probably all know them. And they said, you know, Moran, we heard about you as a scientist. We know that you study the brain. We want you to work with us on studying this moment that people think they can't do something and whether it is possible to do more at this spot. And I said, well, makes sense. It's an interesting question, but you guys are a drink company. What does it have to do with athletes? And they said, well, we also sponsor athletes, and we're really interested in understanding the limit of human capacity. So we can bring to our headquarters in California a number of athletes from all kind of domains, sports like cycling and surfing and many others. And you're gonna have a chance to study their brains while they train. And what we did was a study that looked like that. We brought the athletes, put them on a stationary bike, and we told them we want you to exercise. And there's one thing I want to tell you, which is I'm your trainer today. I'm going to control the power of your bicycle in this case, and I'm going to make it harder or easier on you. I want you to keep cycling no matter what and not stop until I tell you to. So you're not going to know if it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes that you're going to have to cycle. All you would know is that I'm controlling the speed and the power, and you're supposed to continue. And the guy said, well, is it going to be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, like anything you can tell us? No, I'm not going to tell you anything. I want you to exercise as long as I control your device. Imagine this happening right now to you guys. You're running on the treadmill, let's say, and you have no control neither on the speed, nor on when you're going to stop. You think, okay, I can easily do 5 more minutes, let's say, but you don't know that I plan to keep you there for 20 more. That's the situation that those athletes were in. Okay, here is the trick here. The trick was that we had no intention to stop at any point. We were gonna push them to the stop moment where they tell me I can't do it anymore. So we put them there. We first had them kind of try to cycle as much as they can for a few seconds, and we determined what's the ultimate power that they can do. We kind of changed the dials, and then we took it to about 70% of that. So something that they can still cycle, but it's pretty hard for them, and for each person it was a different number. And then we had them cycle for 1 minute, 2, 3, 4. They start to breathe heavily. They kind of look at me and say, hey, doctor, when am I going to stop? I say, continue, I'll tell you. So they do 1 more minute, another one. They start to really get tired and they say, well, I'm getting really tired. When am I going to stop? I say, continue, I'll tell you. And they do it for a little bit longer, and eventually they all stopped. At some point, despite me telling them, you can't stop, they all broke. They all said, we can't do it anymore. And this is what I actually was looking for. I wanted to get to this moment because what I cared about is looking at their brain just before they stopped. I wanted to see how the brain looks in a person who is an experienced athlete just a minute before their brain decides that it can't do it anymore. And turns out that regardless of whether you're an elite athlete or whether you're an amateur person who's just doing it as a hobby, all of you have this mechanism that's the same. It's in the front of your brain. It's a system that we call the executive function, or the frontal lobe, that is supposed to look back at all the other systems and tell them when it thinks enough is enough. And what we did with those athletes is that we learned exactly what are the signatures. How does the brain look when you get to the moment that you're about to stop in, say, 1 minute? And then we told the athletes something else. You're going to come back tomorrow. You're going to do the same thing you did today. You're going to run on the treadmill or cycle on the stationary bike. And this time, I'm going to play a sound to you when I think, by looking at your brain, that you're about 1 minute for quitting. So I will tell your brain and you that I know that you're at this spot that you feel that you can't do it anymore. And what I want you to do is do 10 extra seconds at this point. So yesterday, as soon as the sound came, you basically felt that you couldn't do it anymore, and within 60 seconds you stopped. Today, when you get to this spot, I'm going to give you a cue that asks you to do 70 seconds, so 10 seconds more. Essentially, we train the athletes to get better, not by focusing on their muscles, but on their brain. Telling their brain that we know it's at this spot where it wants to stop, and training it to do a little bit more. And this is something that many of you who have been doing exercise know, which is that the brain somehow controls our mental abilities. If you ever ran a marathon, for example, you know that when you get to the 25th and a half mile, you feel like you can't do it anymore. But suddenly you see the finishing line. Like half a mile away or a mile away, you see the end. And suddenly it looks possible because you say, okay, I can get all the way to this milestone there. We have extra energy. If instead of seeing the 26 mile, you would be told that actually you have like 15 more miles, you might be very different. And in that sense, the brain is the one that interprets reality all the time. If you felt the same pain you're feeling when you're done with, say, a 1 hour exercise at the gym without being in the gym, you would go to the doctor. You say, something's wrong with me. I'm feeling extra pain. I don't know what to do with that. But if this pain happens in the context of the gym, you're much more forgiving. You say, I guess I'm feeling this pain because I was just pushing myself to the limit. So the brain's perspective on experiences is critical to how we perceive them. The pain at the 25th mile, knowing that it's 1 mile to the finishing line, is different than the same pain of the 13th mile, where you still have 13 miles to go. In the same way, the pain when you know that you, in 70 seconds, are going to stop and that I know that you're feeling it, is totally different than if you don't know that anyone knows that you're about to quit. And what's key about this understanding is to recognize that in many ways, pain, our experience of I can't do it anymore, or anything that has to do with our body's interaction with the brain, is mostly governed by a system in the front of the brain that tells us how to interpret reality. And if we learn to exercise and train it, we can actually master our pain, feel different about it, give ourselves more energy, get beyond those 70% energy that we usually stop at, and maybe get to 75%, and altogether improve our training because we would know that we can calibrate the difference between what I think I cannot do and what I actually cannot do. And that is a key moment that we're going to talk about in one of the next videos, when we talk about how you can actually bring yourself to do things when you think you cannot. But before I go into that thing, I want to focus on one thing that many people ask me often about, and I think is important, and that is, if we talk about the body and the brain, what is the brain's role in controlling specifically our dieting? A lot of people are exercising because they want to lose weight or look better, or because it feels that their diet will actually change their happiness level and so on. And many times we focus mostly on the food and on the nutritious aspect of that. But I want to talk to you for a second about how the brain affects the control of your body when it comes to dieting. Let's take that for a second as a thought that I want you to ruminate on. What do you think happens in your brain when you say, I don't want to eat the chocolate, and you still do it? Or when you say, in the next 10 days, I'm going to refrain from touching anything that has sugar in it, and you still do it. What is happening in your brain when the same mind is the one that says, I won't do it, and actually end up doing it? So there are a number of things that we can talk about when it comes to dieting, our brain's involvement in that, and generally how we perceive those moments of conflict when you can't do something and you do, or when you don't want to do something and you end up changing your mind. And the key to understanding it is to think about the brain as not just one thing, but a collection of many elements that all have different incentives and different interests. There's part of you that wants more sugar because it likes reward. There's a part of you that thinks long-term and cares about that, and that part maybe thinks more about the reward that will come from waiting and not eating the candy right now. And at each point in life, those systems kind of form a coalition together, and they vote and they rival each other, and in the end they arrive at a conclusion that is your actions. But at any given point of time, different systems have more or less power. The things that affect the interaction between them are stress, the time of day, who you're with, and the context by which you're at. This is why, for instance, some people do better when they train in teams rather than alone, because the accountability that comes from having other people look at you when you fail or succeed in something make a difference. This is why trainers oftentimes help us a lot. This is why some people only do well when it is pushed to the end. When we get sick, we say, okay, now I'm gonna actually stop eating those things that are bad for me. And each of those things change the dynamics in our brain. They give more power to different systems that will change our behavior. I think the best way to understand how those systems work when it comes to planning our life forward comes from understanding what we call a mental accounting in our brain. Mental accounting has many ways to interpret it, but it boils down to the fact that our brain many times has a hard time thinking about the future, and it's basically, when we ask you a question about the future, just puts the future as if it is now. Let me make it clear by giving an example. Imagine that right now I offer you a piece of chocolate. You smell it, it's under your nose, it's really delicious, and you want to take a bite, and I tell you, before you take the bite, let me tell you something. If you eat it right now, you're gonna get chocolate, that's it. But if you wait 1 week and you then eat it, you won't eat the chocolate right now, I'm gonna give you a chocolate and maybe another reward, maybe another delicious cake. So you get a chocolate and a cake in a week versus just chocolate right now. You have to make a choice. Do you wanna take something right now that is really delicious and you really want it, you crave it, or can you wait 1 week, seems like a lot, and then get two better things? Well, for many of us, this is a tough choice. If the chocolate is here, if I smell it, if it's already kind of in my hands, it's sometimes very hard for us to resist the temptation and not take it, even though we understand that if we wait a little bit, we'll get something even better. But let me tell you a different story that will tell you why I am thinking that this is a muscle we can train. Imagine the following experiment. I come to you right now and I give you a piece of chocolate. You hold it in your hands. You smell the aroma, it's delicious. You want to eat it, but I tell you, hey, before you take it, let me tell you something. If you won't eat it right now, if you put it back in the box and wait 1 week, I'll give you the chocolate and something extra, another cake, $100, another chocolate that's even tastier. I'm gonna give you more of what you want right now if you agree to wait 1 week and not take it right now and then eat it only in a week from now. For many of us, it's pretty hard. Right now, you see it in your hand, you smell it, you want it, and you have to delay satisfaction by a week before you get something. For us, it's really, really hard. Let me tell you a different story, and then you compare those two. Imagine that you don't have a chocolate in your hand right now, but I tell you, in 1 year, I'm gonna give you a chocolate. 1 year, you're gonna get a piece of chocolate and you can eat it right then and then. Or you can wait 1 year and 1 week. So instead of getting it in 1 year, you're gonna have to wait 1 more week after, and then you're gonna get the chocolate and the cake and the $100 and everything you want. For our brain, those two cases are very different. The here and now, I sit in front of my eyes and I can either take it right now or wait a week, is much harder than wait a year or wait a year and 1 week. Because the future, all roses. Everything is easy in the future. We can definitely wait. If you already waited 1 year, what's the problem waiting 1 more week? But between here and 10 days from now or a week from now, a whole different story. Now, presumably in 1 year, you'll feel the same as you feel right now. Suddenly the week difference is gonna feel very, very difficult. But somehow our brain fails to really imagine the future. When we tell our brain, think about the far future, it kind of says far futures are the same. There's no difference between 1 week and 1 year and 1 week. They're all the same, like they're far in the future. But the now is a totally different story. So, the point of that is that our brain has a system that's really having a hard time when it comes to imagining far, far things. It has a much easier way of thinking about the here and now. This is why many of us have a hard time thinking about retirement and saving for that. Or having kind of decisions that are long-term, like what am I gonna do when I'm turning 90? We just think in a way that the future is far and we have no idea how it's gonna look, and by then we're gonna be different people. And I think that once we understand that, we already can do something about it. If we understand that our brain lives in the here and now and has a hard time thinking about far futures, we can create all kinds of situations that allow us to resist temptations that are far in the future. For example, the classical case that a lot of people talk about is what's known as the Ulysses contract. Ulysses contract is a story about the great warrior Ulysses, and back in the days, he had to sail his ship from one place to another, and what he learned that was on the way where his ship was going to pass, the island of the Sirens. And the Sirens were known to have these beautiful voices that when they sing, make sailors be tempted to sail towards them and basically hit the rocks and break their ships. So no one could pass the Sirens because their singing would actually make most boats crash. And when Ulysses really wanted to hear the sound of the Sirens, But he also didn't want his boat to crash, so he had a deal with his sailors where he tied himself to the mast of the boat, and he asked all his sailors to put dough in their ears so they won't hear the sirens. So effectively, the sailors could sail, but they couldn't hear the sound of the sirens, so they wouldn't be tempted and they would keep sailing forward. And he would be the only one who would actually hear the voices of the sirens, but he would be chained to the mast, so he wouldn't be able to tempted in any way to actually go towards them. This led to the term that we now know as Ulysses contract, which is a contract that you create with yourself that stops you from doing things. This is the contract that you say, for instance, I'm going to put money in a bank account that I will give to a person and tell them if I end up doing something I shouldn't do, like, for instance, drink if you're an alcoholic, or call my ex-girlfriend if I promised I won't, then this person actually cashes the money. So you lose money by doing something. And if you don't do it for a year, you get it back. In fact, in Los Angeles, where I used to live, there's a gym that I really liked that had this remarkable idea. In the beginning of the year, around Christmas, when everyone kind of makes plans for the years to come, and they make all kinds of contracts where they say, next year I'm going to exercise a lot more, I'm going to be much healthier, I'm going to eat different and so on. This gym has a contract that they made where they asked you to pay up front about $700 for a year-long membership at the gym. And they told you, if you shop at the gym anytime in the year, you get back $2. So if you come to the gym every day for the next year, you're not only going to get all your money back, you're going to actually earn money. 360 days of you coming out to the gym and getting paid $2 every time you show up. But what they knew is that every time you don't show up, the money stays with them. And they made a fortune because people at the beginning of the year give all the money and say, I'm going to actually make money because I'm going to go every day to the gym. It's going to be great. But as the year progresses, we all fail. This is a Ulysses contract that shows us how we could work our way towards making plans into the future. Now, working with teams, creating conditions that will actually force you to do things that you don't want to do are the way to make our brain fight this difficulty that we all have, which is that our brain has one system that wants the here and now, and others that are caring about the future, and that the future ones usually have a hard time winning because the here and now usually wins. So, now that we spoke about those items of contract and the fact that your brain is really having a hard time thinking about the future, how do we tie it to dieting? Well, you probably all know that dieting involves basic mechanisms in our brain that we all can understand. Generally, eating healthier, moving more, those things affect dieting. Also, metabolism affects your dieting, and also the types of things that you eat. But what's important to understand also is that in many ways our brain has a key factor in dieting that has to do with this temporal discounting, with the fact that it's hard for us to imagine the future and act to far future rather than right now. Here's what I mean by that. Our brain has evolved over hundreds of thousands of years of natural selection to actually keep us a little bit fatter than we need to be if we want to be fit. When we lived in the savannas, we didn't know when the next meal is going to come or how much nutrition is going to be in it. So over years of evolution, it became easier for the brain to have a delay between the moment we actually are full and the moment we feel full. Our brain created this gap of about 20 minutes, which is when our stomach tells our brain, I have enough nutrition and food to feel full, and the moment the brain actually tells you, don't put any more food in your mouth. These 20 minutes are made so we can actually fill up and have a little bit more in us than we need, because we don't know if tomorrow is going to be enough food, so we better store some fat right now. This was very helpful hundreds of thousands of years ago when we needed the food to be collected, but right now we live in a world where it's very unlikely that we will have no source of food near us. In fact, if there's any famine right now in the world, it's probably political, or probably someone is interested in that rather than just no resource of food nearby. So our world is now working against us in that sense, because there's the brain that doesn't tell us that we actually are full, and the body that wants to get full that are working independently. So one easy trick that neuroscientists can tell you that helps you is to just eat slower. If you eat slower, if you take, say, a few minutes between every part of the meal, if you take short breaks and give yourself some time, you will trick your brain. You will do this Ulysses contract against yourself. You will make your brain think that you're done and start processing and telling you I'm getting full, while at the same time, you will control the intake. Now, there's a lot more to say about how to control the brain in terms of nutrition, but the one thing I wanted kind of people to think and to take from this thing is that if we think about our body as a system that fits into the brain, that tells the brain what it needs and the brain controls it backwards, then something in your belly tells your brain, I'm full. Your brain responds to it by creating this contract that says, I don't want any more, or I want more. And if you just know this, if you just take one thing from our short journey this afternoon, is that if you learn how your brain thinks about time, if you know when your brain gets full, how much time does your brain need in order to feel full when you actually are full, if you learn how your brain responds to pain, whether it's real pain or pain that is coming from, say, exercising and so on, you will start having more control over it. Instead of your brain telling you what to do, you will have more control, which means that in your brain, you have all those systems that fight, you will give more energy to one of them, the one that controls time and perception, and allow yourself to suddenly have more reign over your body. And you can decide when you're full, you can decide when you can exercise more, and you will actually have a little bit more control of your experience of the world through your body. Thank you so much for joining me on this trip where we walked in Central Park towards what I call the Mind Palace. I'm Dr. Cerf, I'm your iFit guide, and I'm very happy that you joined us in talking about the body. Next time, we're going to talk even more about what we can do to the body to make it even better. Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Cerf, I'm your iFit guide, and today we're on the High Line in New York. We're gonna walk together and talk about your emotions, how they work in our brain, how they interact, and how you can use them to not let them guide you, but actually guide them.